UNRWA was banned about 2 months ago. About in Knesset there was a law. We talked about it, about the law banning UNRWA, and when we talked about it, I definitely have mentioned that basically while the banning went through, there is a sort of like a mid period of 90 days, basically, notice for UNRWA get out. And oftentimes when I talk about these things, it's like 90 days. It's like into the future, but it's actually starting. It's similar to when Trump got elected, and it's like, well, we still have like 3 months, or there's still like 3 months before something changes. But in 2 days, he will be officially the Electoral College will officially be. There is a term for it. Pro-
Certified.
Certified. That's the so the election will be officially certified, and 2 weeks after that, Trump will officially come into office. So that's it's already here. And similarly with UNRWA, basically the 90-day period ends in about 3.5 weeks. Basically, I think on January 28th, around that time. So yeah, UNRWA will officially be banned, or sort of will officially not be allowed to get visa, not be able to cooperate with the IDF. We'll talk about that. And so UNRWA is now trying to is talking. Uh, so I mean, what else? Something I'll say from so officials from UNRWA said that they told the New York Times it won't be safe for staffers to operate because they rely on coordination with Israel, which will end on January 8th. So that's what I meant. Basically, when it came to UNRWA's operation in Gaza, well, also in the other parts of the so-called Palestinian territories, but specifically with Gaza, they had to pretty much cooperate and coordinate with them every single day, which now they won't be able to. So I definitely want to talk about that. Joining me today is James Valiant. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And James, what do you think? UNRWA is truly running out of time.
Good and good riddance. And it couldn't happen soon enough. Both Israel and the United States have, America, it was a temporary thing that runs out, I think, in March. But it's pretty clear because Trump himself had banned UNRWA when he was president, even before October 7th. Let's give some credit to Mr. Trump there.
Defunded.
Defunded, exactly. And Biden is in a state of suspension that comes up in March, and given Trump's attitude. And Israel, of course, has passed a law in the Knesset, and they did give them a 90-day period. And without the coordination of Israel, it is unsafe. And without the money from the United States, they will have a lot fewer resources to deal with. So goodbye, UNRWA, and good riddance, and don't let the door hit you on the rear end. These people more look, they said more than a dozen were found to have been operatives of Hamas. Operatives of Hamas, people who participated in October 7th. This is not something that any civilized nation should be funding. They are pro-Palestinian, they're pro-terrorist. They keep the bad guys alive. Say, what are we going to do without the food and the medicine that we get from UNRWA? We're going to starve. No, it's not inevitable that you starve. Surrender. There's an option. There's a non-starvation option on the menu that never needed because of UNRWA's existence. The existence of UNRWA extended the war, perpetuates Hamas, perpetuates terrorism, perpetuates the ideology. Even worse, that who's going to educate our young people? I would rather nobody educate your young. I'd rather you learn from your parents all that you learned. They'd be taught from these schools that taught hatred, anti-Semitism, violence through a UN organization. They were perpetuating a new generation of ideological hatred against Jews and more terrorism. So good riddance. The education part, it was nothing but negative. You've got terrorist operatives working for them, but even broader, feeding them at all, kept them going, kept them alive. And they did not confront them with the harsh reality that Palestinians should be confronted with: starve or surrender. You can give up those hostages, you can surrender and say, we're going to live at peace. And guess what? The food problem's gone. The getting medical aid from international bodies is gone. You want it's not like there's and this is how they present it. The people at UNRWA or the Palestinians. We're going to starve to death. How are we going to how are we going to survive? Well, if you cared about your life, you'd surrender right now. No, we don't have. The world does not have an obligation to feed you as you are preaching hate and killing Israelis. No, no one has that. In fact, it is wrong. It is morally wrong to sanction people who are engaged in violence like that. Remove that moral sanction, remove that resource for them, and then suddenly they'll be confronting reality as they ought to be confronting reality. If you want your children to live, you will surrender. And once you've committed terrorist acts like October 7th, that has to be the choice that they're confronted with. It sounds cruel. No, no. What's cruel is keeping this perpetual war going on forever, teaching hatred, feeding people who are engaged in terrorism and are still hitting you with rockets. No, no one has an obligation. In fact, the moral obligation is to stop feeding violent people. Stop feeding them. Confront them with the reality. You can't kill us and expect us to keep you alive. No, it doesn't work like that. No, they need to be confronted with the harsh black and white reality of surrender or starve. And if that, to the extent that saying aloha, goodbye forever to UNRWA means that, and my fear is that it won't be so stark, that there will be other private organizations that'll jump in and try and support even Hamas and the worst terrorists in the area. But insofar as UNRWA has been the main source of their food aid and medical aid and education, I mean, about how that it's worse than adding insult to injury when you talk about the education. They're actually training and conditioning a whole new generation of terrorists. That obviously has to go away. The West is obviously, talk about immorality. European countries that jumped right back on into funding UNRWA are funding hatred and violent ideology. That's what they're doing. They're morally sanctioning it and materially making it possible in the worst way you can by means of education and ideas. When it comes to medicine and food, well, yeah. How are your children going to survive if you persist in wanting Israel destroyed? All you have to do is surrender.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk more about the idea of humanitarian crisis, as many people are calling it. But first, yeah, the actual material support, the actual yeah, the humanitarian crisis we'll talk later. But yeah, the fact that UNRWA employees have participated in October 7th. The fact that we found weapons or Hamas infrastructure under UNRWA buildings, under I think it was yeah, one of UNRWA buildings. The fact that we know that Hamas are using UNRWA vehicles. So yeah, all of these things, all of the fact that Hamas is able to hide behind UNRWA, that UNRWA is viewed as this sort, it's the UN. It's viewed as this sort of neutral party, which even there is a problem. There is you shouldn't be neutral when it comes to civilization and savagery. That's evil. That's not being objective. That's not being neutral in any way. So yeah, that alone should absolutely be enough for Israel to say no, that we cannot allow such a thing to operate. The fact that children are being educated by UNRWA, and we've seen what they are being educated about. They are actually educated about killing Jews. That's what they are educated. We've done one episode where where the children of and those were I think those were specifically children in the West Bank. So the more moderate part, because UNRWA also operates in those areas. From what I understand, UNRWA is actually teaching more children than even the Palestinian Authority itself. I don't know which education is better. I don't know. They're both pretty bad. But the fact that Palestinian Authority is not even able to assert itself, the fact that UNRWA is still needed after, like, it was founded after the foundation of Israel. It was pretty much founded from the start, and that's a big arguments I've heard from Israeli politicians is the fact that UNRWA is perpetuating this crisis. It's a separate organization. Again, there is a refugee I think it's called refugee agency. There is a UN agency for the like refugees of the world. Yet the Palestinians get this separate organization, and again, I don't think you can justify it in any way. There's nothing different. There should be nothing different between refugees. I mean, I have problems with all UN agencies, but at least my understanding with the other refugee agency, there is some try to resettle them if they cannot be returned back. There is some try to, make sure they are not no longer refugees. But with Palestinians, they are perpetual refugees. They are being kept refugees. So one day they can go back into Israel proper. One day, when the Jews are kicked out, they can go back. It's ridiculous. I mean, at some point, you just put them somewhere else. You don't try to keep them refugees forever just so you have this political justification against Israel, just so you have this way to fight against Israel.
Now,
Um, yeah.
the UNRWA gets more funding than there's as you point out, UN has an organization for refugees. That's all the other refugee situations in the whole globe. But UNRWA, the Palestinians get a special one, and the definition of what a refugee is different for them. Somehow they get a special definition for, even though you may be happily living in Morocco and your grandfather moved there and your parents were born there and you were born there, you're still a Palestinian refugee for as many generations as you've been peacefully and happily living in some other country. Well, that is absolutely absurd. And they have their own definition. And of course, they spend more than the other, far more than the relief organization for refugees as such. Now, for situations in which there are acts of aggression and people are made refugees unjustly because of some war, I'm sure I'm not alone in having sympathy for such people. But the United Nations is uniquely unqualified to be distributing any such thing. It comes from forced money from taxpayers. It is an organization which is itself evil and supports dictatorship and terrorism. As I've explained many times, the UN has basically become a dictatorship and terrorism protection racket. So anything that comes from the UN, but this organization, UNRWA in particular, is just about the most evil of all the UN organizations, because they've been actively propagandizing terrorists, a whole new generation of terrorists, in perpetuating this war, perpetuating the ideology of violence against Israel on the UN dime. That means mostly on Western countries' tax dime. And that is just wrong. But also, in any context of war, the aggressors should not be fed. They should not be kept alive. When they start killing people, they need to know the life and death consequences apply to them as well. That's right. You will starve if you can't feed yourselves. And look, what have the Palestinians done to make Gaza a decent place for their people to live? Nothing. The Hamas when they took over government, they existed for one purpose and one purpose alone: to kill Israelis, to kill as many Jews as possible. That was their sole raison d'etre. And UNRWA must go. Obvious. I mean, how suicidal when they say demand that Israel and the United States continue to recognize them. Aren't they evil if they have bans on UNRWA? No. How suicidal do you think the victims ought to be? Feed you as you're killing us? Feed you as you're throwing rockets over onto the victim side? No, that's moral perversion. And just how suicidal do they expect Israel to be? Obviously, the Knesset banned them. They gave them 90 days longer than I would have given them as a grace period. But you cannot feed your enemy. I mean, that's a form of suicide, slow, drawn out suicide. And surely we cannot expect Israel to engage in slow, drawn-out suicide because the poor Palestinians are starving. Well, they don't have to starve. There is like I say, there's always been a big non-starvation alternative for them: surrender.
Yeah, and when it comes to sort of, so we heard from Israel that so this is again, and this is my problem. This is not just ban on any humanitarian organizations in Gaza. It's banned specifically on UNRWA. Well, we call it ban, but technically, it, you can say it's not a ban. It's basically they are just refusing to cooperate. But in function, it's basically, yeah, UNRWA is not able to operate in Gaza. But Israel has said they are willing to work with other aid agencies. And I think I'm trying
That's
to
the part
remember.
I don't like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So well,
No, so long as Hamas
yeah,
is in
let me just
control. Yeah,
let me just finish. So this is
sorry.
from Times of Israel, and Times of Israel reports that it is unclear whether such cooperation ensued, meaning if a new
Good.
sort of cooperation has started. So we don't hear. It looks like we don't hear a clear thing from Israel yet. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is good. Again, when it comes to sort of the idea of humanitarian crisis, war is a humanitarian crisis. There was a war started by one side, and by that act, they put their people into a humanitarian crisis. That's what war is. War is not. Again, these people have like a I call either sort of like a game-like view of war or sort of like a medieval view of war. That it's just that there is a hill there. We're all gonna send our knights there. They're gonna fight, and whoever wins takes over the other country and or becomes the king of a new land area, and that's it. No, war is there is a concept of total war, and that's what war is. It's saying you want to exterminate the other party. You want and that's what Hamas wants. They want to kill all Jews. That's or not even all Jews. They want to kill all Israelis because Arabs have been taken on October 7. Arabs have been killed on October 7. So it's absolutely genocidal ideology. It's absolutely genocidal intent to kill all Israelis. That's what Hamas started. That's what Palestinians were celebrating on October 7th, and
And it is
are
not genocide on the other side to prevent aid from going in. No, Israel is wrong if they say we're going to help other organizations feed these people. No, it is immoral for you to feed the people who've just attacked you and who are still attacking you. It is immoral. It is suicidal. It is anti-life. It is preventing the bad guys from feeling the consequences of their own actions. They must be confronted. Once they start murdering you, they must be confronted with the stark alternative of starvation and death or peace. Now you got a very clear choice there. And it is immoral for Israel or America to fund other aid organizations that would support the Palestinians so long as the majority of that population wants Israel destroyed. It's just that simple. It's immoral. They must be confronted with the consequences of their own behavior. You do know you're not doing them any favor in the long run by perpetuating the violence they engage in. How long does this war have to go on? For how many more decades does this have to go on? No, until and unless they're confronted with the stark reality, you will die. You will starve your own children if you continue this war. If you do not make peace with Israel, your children will starve to death as a result of your own actions. That is what they have to be confronted with. That harsh reality. It's that simple. Uh, Palestinians could be living a wonderful life today, a wonderful life today. All they have to do is surrender the idea of destroying Israel. That's all they have to do. They have a really clear option, an option for a peaceful world in which all kinds of international aid organizations will come in to help them. We can talk about the merits of that when and if that ever comes to be. But the point is, they have an option that involves all kinds of help that the world would pour in on them. If but look, Israel's got to say no. They've got to have a clear line. We're not going to cooperate. We're not going to permit aid. We're going to blockade any aid that might come into Gaza, even into the West Bank, insofar as they're violent. No, there is no obligation. In fact, quite the reverse. The moral thing for Israel to do would be to prevent any medical or food aid from coming in. That's the moral way to fight a war, to end the war.
yeah, and We know that Palestinian so-called civilians have been holding hostages in their homes. We know that the employees of hospitals that Hamas operated in didn't say anything. We know the fact that to this day, there's not a single Palestinian I know that came out with information about the hostages, despite I think a few times, I'm not sure if the deal is still up, but a few times there was a deal from either Israeli government themselves or even private businessmen in Israel, from what I remember, basically saying any information towards the release of hostages or towards the rescue of hostages will reward you for that, will protect you. There were, there are stories about some depends on how you take, but some Palestinians, the one story I'm specifically thinking of, there was one person that I think he grew up in Gaza but later moved into Israel proper, but was technically still a Palestinian. And on October 7, he actually saved people. He actually saved Israelis. There is a possibility, yet no one in Gaza, no one who actually lives in Gaza, is doing anything like that, despite the fact that Hamas's like grip on Gaza has been severely diminished. There is still no one coming up. There is still no one really speaking out against Hamas, really trying to fight against Hamas. And why should we? Again, like I would be for some humanitarian aid if we got a single piece of like tactical advantage from it. I mean, if we could get possibly even if we could get like some hostages back by sort of denying aid, by something like that, I could see a potential deal. But there is nothing. We Israel is required to deliver aid to its enemies, to allow aid to go to its enemies. And whenever it does, and it also has to do it by themselves, because whenever it just does it to Hamas, then they just steal it. They just take it for themselves, and
Yep.
they cover it for themselves. You have to remember that any sort of foreign aid going into going into the country that's a dictatorship is primarily helping the dictatorship. It's not helping the people there. So yeah, I mean this
Oh, it was
whole
a direct subsidy to Hamas. A direct subsidy to Hamas. The aid was captured by Hamas. Insofar as it got to the people, it got to them through the intermediary of Hamas, and no doubt at a profit or at to the people they want and not to the people they don't want. And when we've seen the man on the street interviews, we just the other day we had a program where we just talked to young people, young Palestinians, and of course, with all the wonderful education that so many of them got through UNRWA, it's hardly surprising. Another reason why it's good to see UNRWA go. But look, it's the ideology. You can look at the polls, you can do the man on the street interviews, you can look at how Hamas got elected. I mean, and so forth and so on. And it goes on and on and on. And let me suggest that it's only because they've been kept fed, they've been kept protected, they've had medical services provided for them, and so forth. That they've even been permitted to do this. Strange that Israel will be called genocidal if they don't actively feed the people who are killing them, which is really perverse, really perverse. They have no genocidal intent, as you pointed out. Hamas has an explicit genocidal intent. I mean, outright explicit, and they engage in these kind of atrocities against civilians, going out of their way to get civilians, whereas Israel will do everything it can, warn people to get out of buildings, do every kind of communication to prevent what they call collateral damage. And yet Israel will be the ones called genocidal. But no, it's genocidal against themselves if they feed the enemy. Israel should not be aiding, abetting, and positively sanctioning the genocidal intentions of their enemies. And that in itself is not genocide, but a perfectly moral approach. You get no food so long as you kill us, period. They should be blockading aid from going into Gaza. They shouldn't be forced to permit it. Rather, yeah, America, that foolish pier that we tried to build to bring in aid, talk about an act of immorality on every level. On every level. That was incompetently done, of course, but even the attempt to say, well, we have to make sure that the people in Gaza are getting fed, got to get food and medicine in there to them. Wrong. No, that perpetuates the violence. We were aiding and abetting the perpetrators of October 7th in trying to get aid to them. They must be confronted with the stark alternative of starve or surrender.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Mary. Mary, thank you so much. So, someone in the chat says, under Geneva Convention, is sorry, Israel had the right to stop any humanitarian aid under the rule of not provide aid to an enemy mixed with civilians and not with proper ID, but instead Israel aids. Well, the fact is nobody cares about international law. Nobody cares about really trying to apply it. Even yeah, you could make any like if you want to make arguments for Israel through international law, I think you easily could. I mean, the fact is that the onus is on both sides to identify themselves. So by Hamas sort of breaking, basically not having any military bases, not having any distinction between civilian and military, they are breaking all parts of international law, and expectation for Israel to adhere while Hamas is not is ridiculous. But no one really cares. The only purpose of international law is to fight against good countries. That's the only goal you can achieve, because the evil countries, the dictatorial nations, will never abide by international law. They don't care for their own citizens, the rights of their own citizens. Why would they care about some foreign international law? And in a similar way, the good countries already have system in place to account for things that could sort of I think viewed even positively as like this is not something a good country should do. There are already sort of a good country is defined by the fact that it already has system in place to deal with these things, and a bad country is defined by the fact they don't have anything like that set in place. They don't have any respect for individual rights, any respect for any sort of laws. So that's why international law is inherently immoral. It penalizes good nations and it does absolutely nothing against evil nations.
Exactly right. You know, Ayn Rand wrote a really wonderful article, and you can find it in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. Who is the final authority in ethics? And you know, when we get these Geneva Convention international law questions, it's almost as though you get the impression that people need some kind of institutional authorization of what more. No, 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 no. Penetrate what now it's true, the older Geneva Code is morally better than these, and they will change they will change the definition of genocide just to get at Israel or Benjamin Netanyahu. It's fluid, and so that whatever the international law from a better time might have said, it will get ignored, believe me, when it comes to Israel. But you're absolutely right. It's not a question of international law. The good guys, ask yourself the moral question. The stark moral question: should a defending nation that has been attacked feed or attempt to starve the attackers, the aggressors? Morally speaking, you have to penetrate that authority level, the Geneva Convention, the United Nations, the ICC, whatever the hell that international body is. Ignore that international body and ask yourself the moral principled question on your own, because reality is the final arbiter of moral disputes, as Ayn Rand explains in that article. Yes, the older Geneva Conventions, based on the needs of wars, say against Nazi Germany. When in the wake of that, you're going to have different kinds of better, let me suggest, slightly better international conventions. But as you point out, the bad guys aren't going to respect international conventions. They're only tying the hands of the good guys who have any respect for that moral authority. But there is no moral authority from the United Nations these days. Quite the opposite. If the UN said X, I would say instinctively, reflexively almost, non-X, not X, anti-X, because it came from the United Nations. It is an evil organization, and UNRWA is among perhaps its most evil arm. See, we have to there's no substitute for you making the moral evaluation yourself. Is it a good idea, as someone is engaged in the atrocities of October 7th, and then they're still continuously throwing rockets at you? Is it moral to feed those people? No, it is immoral to feed those people. You must confront those people with the life and death circumstance that they're confronting you with, or you will never end this battle properly.
Yeah, and sort of, the answer oftentimes to that is like, well, we want to prevent innocent people dying. We want to prevent, we have this moral ideal that we want to achieve. And it actually reminds me of a sort of discussion or a debate I had with someone from my country, and he was talking about the idea of anarcho-capitalism and how it's a moral ideal. Like we should try to get as close to that as possible, but practically it's not possible. So we sort of stay at the idea of night watchman state or sort of minarchist state. And my answer to him, you are like a communist who says it's good in theory but doesn't work in practice. If something doesn't work in practice, how can it be good in theory? And that's also my sort of answer to any idea of international law. If something is impractical, if it's literally impossible for yourself to defend while trying to also defend your enemies, why is it viewed as like a morally good? Why is it viewed as sort of like something that is morally acceptable? It's also, talking about people who, again, people who really like view altruism, view Mother Teresa as the moral pinnacle, yet don't want to live like that, or say that like that's morally good, but human nature is selfish, so we cannot really achieve that moral good. Well, if something goes against human nature, why are you trying to go for it? Shouldn't we like build a morality based on human nature? Shouldn't we like try to like build our worldview around what we actually are, rather than plucking this Plato's apple from a tree and trying to emulate that?
Well, you know what it is. It's if your morality comes from a supernatural dimension and is aimed at goals in a supernatural dimension, you're going to have a theory practice dichotomy here on Earth. If you are like Immanuel Kant and you divorce ethics from all consequences and you sever it from any connection to human life, then of course morality will be this impractical thing, and you're really just making yourself a martyr for it. So if you approach it in a religious or a Kantian way, of course there's a built-in theory practice dichotomy. Morality means you suffer. Morality means you've got to suck it up and die, in effect, sacrifice and martyr yourself. And that's the way they frame moral issues because of that. But of course, that is a perversion. That's an anti-life morality. That's the morality of death, as Ayn Rand put it. If you are looking at the needs of human life in a long-term principled way, then there is no division between the moral and the practical. And not only is it the necessary thing for your survival when you're attacked to starve the enemy, it's actually the biggest kindness you can do to the other side. Had we approached the Palestinian issue decades ago in this way, we would never have had UNRWA. We would never have had all this sanctioning of evil, and it would have been better for the Palestinian people. And it's really funny how when people are confronted with the real alternative to starvation, they reassess matters, and how quickly they will reassess matters. And this applies too to the use of force. If we have no hesitation in taking out these hospitals that Hamas used as military sites, if we have no hesitation in we're not the ones who are worried about your civilian casualties. You're the ones who ought to have been before you attacked us. If we had that attitude, guess what? It would be better for everyone involved. Everyone involved. And there's no division between the moral and the practical there.
Just quickly, someone in the chat is asking, when did murder become immoral? When did theft become immoral? When did slavery become immoral? Well, depending on how we take it, I think it became sort of immoral once you understand reality, once you understand what is human nature. So technically, Ayn Rand is so about 100 years ago. Uh,
Well,
but
Well, we have laws
yeah.
against murder and theft. It's in the Ten Commandments, right? But those societies which would allow violence to run rampant or have no respect for property rights aren't going to be thriving, successful society. We learned morality is something, though, humans learn. Humans engaged in human sacrifice. They thought that killing children to appease the gods was a good thing once upon a time. So, and people thought slavery was natural and good for centuries. Only in recent centuries has humanity gotten to the point where we realize in the civilized world just how evil slavery is. Morality is a science that needs to be learned. And we are born moral savages, and and as a species, we began as moral savages, and we learned things like rules against murder and theft operatively by trial and error. And then we imposed them religiously on people, combined with this whole BS religious justification for it. But the point is that it became immoral when people began to realize that it is anti life, whether they admit it or not. So we didn't have to wait for Ayn Rand. Insofar as there's been good medicine and good engineering, it's been operating on the life as the standard of value implicitly as the premise. It took Ayn Rand, and that's the importance of philosophy, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can know this, be principled about it, be consistent about it and its application. Ayn Rand, of course, does provide the correct basis for approaching moral questions, and having the correct basis makes it a whole lot easier to apply those principles. So you ask, when did it become immoral? It was always stupid and anti-life to engage in murder. It was always self-destructive, but it took humanity several steps and a long time to learn the reasons why. Yes.
Yeah, and while sort of you could say with the Ten Commandments that we knew murder was immoral, it really took well, sort of I think no is the important aspect of it, sort of understanding. While there was maybe again sort of it's in the Ten Commandments, then thou shalt not kill. Sort of understanding why it's anti-life to murder, sort of having why it's wrong to steal, understanding that took. And actually, it took the Enlightenment. That's why civilization, sort of as we know it, sort of peaceful coexistence with each other, was only possible around the time of the Enlightenment. And America is one of the first truly free nations, at least in principle. So yeah, and before we had that, we were killing each other, despite the fact that we all knew that murder is wrong.
Right. Think of it. Morality was, in fact, I mean, people did think that the Pharaoh was God, and that the Pharaoh, his well-being did keep the Nile flooding every season and so forth. If you're operating on that kind of a mystical level, you're missing morality altogether. It took the age of science. It took the Enlightenment before people got around to the idea of understanding what rights really are. And why I would say that the United States was the first shot at all at a truly moral government is because they were using enlightenment principles like individual rights, to create a government for the first time that wasn't based on race or some mystical thing like the Pharaoh, or it was actually a reality, life-based morality of the Enlightenment. And that's what gave us liberalism in the West in general. And the only moral approach to government and law that has existed. And that's a very recent phenomenon. As you point out, only the last couple of centuries have Western nations been attempting to be morally principled in a this worldly, pro-life way, even if they don't know that life is the standard by which any decent principles can be generated. But you're
And
right, it took Ayn Rand to point out the real reason why, ultimately, the justification for it. So now we can really understand what our moral principles should be and how we should apply them.
And
Yes.
understanding is a big part of morality, because while people say Israel has a right to defend itself, while people say that Israel should destroy Hamas, when it comes to the practical aspects of applying the morality, when it requires not giving aid to your enemies, when it requires truly go in, sort of General Sherman during the American Civil War, sort of saying, I'll make Georgia howl, or I'll make Savannah howl, basically saying, I will go in and I'll tear down rail by rail the South, because they've decided to fight against us, because they've decided to be immoral, or sort of to defend practice of slavery. In the same way, Hamas has decided they want to be genocidal. Hamas has decided they want to kill all Jews. They decided they had a piece of land and they've decided to do this with it. And we'll need to make not Ramallah, Rafah Howell. We need to make sure that they are in a sense given the dose of reality. This is what happens when you
Well,
try to deal with people by force.
what's the thing that kids use? Cry uncle. Say uncle, say uncle, say uncle. Is they're holding your arm behind your back or something? You say uncle is the magic word to get it to stop. See, the Palestinians aren't even close to saying uncle yet, are they? And they won't, in principle, until we deliver the moral message that we're happy to say starve or surrender. You see, and put that into practice. No, guess what? So long as you're aggressive and genocidal, you will starve, and it's your fault. That's the
And
moral clarity that's required.
and the banning of UNRWA moves us closer. So let's, as they said, we still have about 3.5 weeks before UNRWA is officially basically gone or supposed to be gone. So we'll see where we go from here. Hopefully, Israel will take better actions. Again, this has been happening. This war has been going on for more than a year. Really, has been going for a long time, and we need to set up sort of what's going to happen in the future. So thank you for joining us today on the Daily Objective. Thank you, James, for joining me. We'll see you tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Bye bye.
Be safe.